groups to do over about a 20-minute period is we want you to come up with the top 3 reasons, and this will be a group exercise, of how the implementation of roundabouts. What are the 3 things that matter?
I'm Chris Bosco with Freeze and Nichols in Texas, and we have several similar ideas that's been communicated here. One of the ones we had was talking about the cost of construction, how it's continued to increase, and one of the things we've seen, particularly in Texas, is trying to educate our contractors, because pretty much we're seeing a different contractor that's getting a low bid, and so really an education there on how to build them on the design side, continue to improve how it's built under traffic, come up with good strategies there. Also echoing what we've heard several times about building for the present. That's something that helps with the cost. It also helps with the drivers getting accustomed to driving roundabouts. One idea we had that may be a little bit different than what we've heard from the previous presenters was we were talking about education outside of the engineering community, and Jeff mentioned how there's some organizations of people that have lost loved ones due to left or failure to yield situations at traffic signals. And those organizations are very focused on trying to improve traffic signals and not really fully on board with the roundabout concept. So maybe reaching out to those groups that have that emotional connection and really focus on trying to educate them to help communicate this message, how roundabouts improve the safety and reduce those type of accidents.
Great, thank you. Deadly pause, sorry.
Daniel Spann with RPM Transportation Nashville, and Michelle Stevens is going to fill in any gaps that I missed. You're going to hear a lot of the same things from our group that you've heard with others, all great ideas. The first thing that came out of our group was the need for more public education, more driver education, and really thinking of that more on a nationwide level. You know, just because we don't have a lot of roundabouts in Tennessee, it doesn't mean a driver may not end up on the ground in Minnesota or Washington State, somewhere where they do have a lot of roundabouts. We need to make that a consistent thing in our driver education. Our second thing was educating other professionals that we've already heard and talked about. Other professional groups, decision makers. I think one of the first ideas about thinking about ways that we can use things like this conference to do that, and maybe come up with some grants and scholarship ideas to get some more of those people here to be around us would be a great thing. I think it's one thing to show them a webinar or show them a book, but being in a room of 350, 400 experts in roundabout design can be very, very compelling. And then the third thing, 2 more things. Consistent messaging with our outreach. You know, we hear a lot of different things here that we're hashing through as far as details of roundabouts, but you know, the bottom line is there is a common core of roundabouts that we all acknowledge as a good thing. You know, so developing that common message that we can share, and it all gravitates back to safety and operations. And then I guess our fourth really research idea that was proposed in our group, and I think this was really good, is looking at pedestrian safety versus pedestrian efficiency. Sometimes we look at the roundabout as being very safe for pedestrians and cyclists and those kind of things, but we kind of sometimes can miss the fact that we may be introducing some more delay for them, or just make sure that we're considering the entire person, vehicle person standpoint as far as getting through the roundabout.
I just think something was mentioned about enforcement. I think we do need to make sure that there is more enforcement when we open up the roundabout, so that people understand that they do need to yield and they do need to make sure they get in the right lane. So that might help us have education, enforcement, and design. All 3 prongs.
Great, thank you.
My name is Shannon Lambert. I'm with Reed Middleton. My group discussed a lot of the same things that a lot of other groups discussed. Public outreach, that making roundabouts part of the culture basically, and starting by educating kids when they're young and getting it in schools and making sure that it's a part of driver's ed. And then for your specific project, having lots of outreach with the community for that, and particularly something else that was brought up earlier in the day of having small meetings with your opposition groups and trying to talk to them on a more individual basis and not at a huge public meeting where they can get a mob following them. The second thing that we talked about a lot was funding, and there's not a lot of money to go around. So what can you do to reduce costs, and what sort of research can you do to ensure that that happens? And looking at research as a funding opportunity. So maybe there could be programs set up for design, construction, and follow-on research to see how your design panned out. And also dealing with emergency vehicles and research opportunities there for how best to accommodate them might be an interesting thing to look at. And then the third thing we talked about was another common theme of avoiding and fixing bad designs. And what can you do about that? One of the things is get it into college courses and your transportation courses. I didn't have roundabouts in my college education at all. Also, something that was an interesting idea that was brought up was creating perhaps a national lessons learned database of what is really working well here and what was a mistake, what should we avoid in the future, and having peer reviews to ensure that we don't have bad designs getting out there on the streets.
Thank you, Shannon.
So I'm Nathan Bells, University of Alaska Fairbanks. As long as we're adding ideas, we're up to 4 now. My group came up with 12, so I'm just going to wrap up.
I knew somebody would pick up on that. I said,
No, I'll try to stick to 4, right? So the first, and I think this is it's a step back before the public relations pieces come up. But I think before that is just getting a better, and we have consensus in our group on this, is a better idea of what the issues are related to public acceptance. So the perceptions and misconceptions about roundabouts or circular intersections in general. The fact that there's just much more bias against roundabouts in the press and media. So many of you folks, if you have the Google alerts like I do and follow roundabouts and traffic circles, that there's many more there's much more negative press about roundabouts than there is positive press about roundabouts. And maybe that's a way to help identify the problem. And then identifying contingents or leaders for each of these opposition groups, so like bike and pet advocates or folks in the trucking industry that can come to public forums and speak out on behalf of roundabouts. The second was multi-lane safety issues. So based on the crash types that we're seeing, the frequency of those crash types, what works? Is it signage? Is it striping? Is it lane designation? The third is getting best practice or consistent practice for the phased construction or expandability of roundabouts over time. We talked about how bad we are at forecasting, and rather than just making a very large roundabout, what are the best methods for building the footprints and then expanding them afterwards. And then the fourth being the driver training piece as well. But one thing that wasn't noted in there, like we can continue to throw roundabouts into driver's ed and teach younger folks, but that maybe one course or maybe like 2 hours within the course, maybe they get to drive through a roundabout or not, depending on where they're taking that driver's ed. But then they have 6, 8 months, a year while they have their permit that they're driving with folks that never learned how to drive a roundabout. So then they're getting those bad behaviors or learning from folks that still don't know how to drive roundabouts properly. So that was our point.
Thank you, Nick.
Hi everyone, I'm Gary Shaws. I'm the Assistant Director of the City of Austin and the city's traffic engineer. I also chair IT's Roundabout Committee. We've heard a lot about collaboration. Collaboration is very important. I left my cheaters in my room, so Robin, thank you for your cheaters. That's why I look this way. My first thing was education. Educating the policymakers. We were very fortunate in Austin to have a state senator who sponsored an hour and a half for us at the state capitol. He invited all of the state legislators, Senate, and the House. Didn't get a whole lot of turnout, but at least the invitation was there. And a special shout out to Reed Middleton, Rachel Price, and Patrick Grady, who helped us with that. So thanks very much. But also, we heard this earlier, educating the new students. Add that tool to their toolbox as they come out of school with these bright and brilliant ideas. Don't limit it just to civil engineering. Schools of architecture, planning, you know, those urban, I use the term urban architects, who can help us convey the emotion of the design. Because a lot of what we face as challenge is people are afraid. So we can bring the technical expertise, but we still have to address the emotion. Which takes us to our second one, you know, how do we bring these up front? You know, we've talked about model policy adoption. There's a variety of them out there. Some of them are cooking. Some states and some local jurisdictions have already adopted some. And we can use those as ideas. One of those that's embedded in there is the roundabouts first policy. New York State DOT has one. I, as a city traffic engineer, have said it. But there's other things that can be done as well. You know, the intersection control evaluation process. You know, the ICE. The roundabout seems to always kind of get skipped, or it's kind of glossed over because the people that are using the tools or implementing the tools don't understand that particular tool, so that tool stays in the toolbox. We also need to, from the standpoint of the MPO, we had a great conversation in our audience. I've projected out 25 years, and my crystal ball is perfect. There are going to be exactly 6,223.7 cars turning here. So we must, and it's going to be during 10 minutes, 25-year out morning peak, so we must design for it, and we must build for it. We really, really need to change that mindset. Let that inform our decision, but especially in terms of very limited budgets, build what you need for maybe the next 10 years. Leave yourself some elbow room if you need to expand. Be clever about how you design for expansion. Third thing is we do need to build the technology expertise. We've heard it said, data is our shield and our sword. So we have to go to the torches and pitchforks. We have to have the armor on that says we know what we're talking about. We have the data, we have the trends, we have the examples, so that we are poised to put that argument aside. If you can answer the data side, then you're dealing with the emotion. But if your data's weak, if your modeling's weak, folks, they are out there picking at your models like at a sweater, looking for the loose thread to unravel the whole thing. You've got to be wired-tight for that. So you've got to have an internal champion, somebody at a level in staff of the implementing agency who is the trusted advisor, you heard me mention this earlier, to the decision makers. You have to look at, I think this is out of Montana, the concept of science leads to the spirit, leads to the action. So I understand it, I'm motivated, I'm going to get it done.
Thank you, Gene. This is like when the credits are rolling at the movie. There's a lot of people to thank. But I want to summarize really quickly. Gary kind of touched it up there, and I just want to summarize for some good things that came out there. The roundabout warrant thing kind of intrigued me a little bit because we talked about it a lot. I sit on the NCU TCD, so we're going to maybe drop that at the next mid-year meeting just to kind of see why, maybe this is something our task force and NCU TCD needs to talk about. I like the idea of pedestrian laws. Maybe there's other things we need to work on to help the roundabout thing. The driver's ed thing just kind of boggles me. At Vail, Colorado, this group made some commitments in their groups to go do something. And I thought about it, and I have an analogy. I was driving to this conference on Tuesday morning, or I was headed to Seattle. I had to go pick up my state vehicle. And I was driving down the street, and there was a big 4x4 sitting in the middle of the road. And I had an SUV, so I went over the top of it and said, whatever. And I had a guilty feeling a block and a half later, and I turned around, came back, and I went out and retrieved it. And I guess the analogy here is that I think that many of you are advocates of this thing. You go back, and we're going back to all parts of the country to think about the little things that you can do to make this roundabout thing a little bit more mainstream. We're all about safety and trying to contribute. So thank you to everybody, Federal Highway Administration, for helping with this conference. The TRB especially, you did a great job. I see Bernardo in the back there. Jeff, Hillary, Mike.